Hello and welcome to the What Women Want Today podcast. You might be asking yourself right about now, well, what do women want? I mean, we're pretty complex creatures, right? Well, I think we want it all, and I'm here to explore it with you. My name is Terry Kellums. I'm your host. Go grab your favorite beverage. I've already got my glass of wine, and let's get started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the What Women Want Today podcast. I am your host, Terry Kellums. I'm so excited to be here with you today. I'm also very much looking forward to my conversation with my guest today. I have Ashley Bernardi on with me today. She is the author of Authentic Power, Giving Yourself Permission to Feel. And she is also the founder and director of Nardi Media. Ashley, welcome.
Hey, Terry, I'm so happy to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So Ashley, I gave all of the nuts and bolts of, or maybe just the very brief introduction of who you are, but tell us a little bit more about Ashley.
Oh gosh, that's a long story. How much time do you have? Well, I'll just say, on the surface, I'm a mom of 3 amazing children, a wife, an entrepreneur, a multi-passionate entrepreneur, in that I do own a media relations company, but I also recently got my certificate in life designer coaching, which is a life coach. And I've been on I know we'll probably get into it, but I've been on this kind of well-being journey for several years now. I have my certificate in Reiki. I have a certificate in the science of well-being from Yale. And that's where that multi-passionate and creative part of me comes in, because I have a thirst to learn, and I've made a lot of pivots in my life, as I know your listeners have as well. And I feel like I'm still pivoting daily to find out where I want to be.
Yeah. Oh, I love all of that. Yeah. I think you and I could be besties in real life, because I enjoy all that as well. I enjoy learning new things. I was chatting this morning with a couple of my friends on the Marco Polo app, and she started talking about Reiki and, the beads that you can wear to
Mala beads.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And candles. And I love all of that stuff. So I could talk for hours about that kind of thing.
Me too. I can get very woo if you want me to.
We'll have to have you back maybe for another woo session at some point. So Ashley, your book, Authentic Power, Giving Yourself Permission to Feel, it looks like that was just released in December. Is that correct?
Yes, it was just released, and I'm so excited to share it with the world, because this was a book that came to me in the very early days of the pandemic. It was March 2020, when, remember, we were all faced with what the hell is happening in the world, and all these feelings of grief, uncertainty, despair, confusion. I felt a lot of familiar feelings that I had felt in the past, but this time what I did differently was I gave myself permission to feel them, because I had been on a very traumatic healing journey for a majority of my life with a major health crisis. And in March 2020, I was like, I know what to do now. I have the tools to move through these messy and uncomfortable emotions and feelings, and I am going to do something about it. So what I did was I started writing, and I started journaling, and that is, and through my writing and journaling and meditating and my I guess I would say self-love and self-care practices, I felt very called to write this book, because I felt like I figured out the key to healing myself and healing from my trauma. And it truly is about accessing my own authentic power to give myself permission to feel. And my authentic power is that wisdom that I have within me. And so that's what inspired me to write this book. And in the book, I also interviewed over 20 healing experts and people who have helped me along my healing journey. It varies from ER physicians to energy healers to spiritual mentors, to psychiatrists and psychologists. I compiled their wisdom in my book as well. So the book contains many actionable tips about how you can give yourself permission to feel, coupled with my own healing journey of experiencing childhood trauma, and then later in life, a health trauma that really just knocked me off my feet and left me bedridden for a very long time.
Wow, there's so many questions I want to ask you all at once. So let's start with the giving yourself permission to feel part, because I feel like, in my age range, my group, I feel like maybe I grew up in good company when I say that we were kind of told, oh, stop crying.
Yeah.
Or, put your big girl panties on, or, which I've probably said at different points in my life too. Or, I just had to buck up and just, power through it and that kind of thing. And lately, I feel like that narrative is changing a little bit. I feel like we're starting to say, we can't rush ourselves through things sometimes. Sometimes we just have to let ourselves feel a little bit. And not that we have to stay there forever, but if you don't allow yourself to sort of process those things, I feel like they're going to come back around to you in a different way, whether that's physical or, whether one day you're just going to, just have a little meltdown.
Well, you're exactly right, Terry. That's actually exactly what happened to me. I believe that society teaches us, and I think a lot of it has to do with our raise, but I also think a majority of it has to do with our culture, that we're supposed to wear this mask of strength. This shows up on social media all the time. This shows up in like, I just lost my job, but I'm going to try to stay positive. Or, I had a friend the other day tell me that his dad had this horrible health diagnosis, but he said, well, I'm just trying to stay positive. And I replied to him, I'm like, but you don't need to be, so we think we need to be strong and we need to show up for ourselves as strong. But what I've learned is that, like, biologically, as human beings, we experience these emotions for a reason, and they're meant to be processed. If they're not processed, they're stored in our body. And what happens if you keep storing them in your body, you end up getting a lot of crap in your body. And so for me, and I can get into what happened to me, is I stored it in my body for almost 25 years.
Oh my
gosh. It started when I was 11 years old. My father died of a sudden death heart attack right in front of me when I was 11 years old. And we were all home on a Sunday night. The last words that we said to each other were, I love you, because he wasn't feeling well that night. And I went to give him a kiss and he said, I love you. And then just moments later, he started actively having a heart attack. And my mom and sister my sister was 9 years old at the time. My mom and sister tag team CPR on him while I ran to call 911 and get the neighbors. And there was nothing that we could have done. We learned that his heart was 90% blocked, but that was such a traumatic shock to my entire system that instead of allowing myself to feel that trauma, which felt very, very scary to actually get into the feeling of it, I acted like everything was fine. I went back to school a week later. My father was an Army colonel. So of course, like, I was going to be an Army colonel's daughter and wear that mask of strength and be stoic like he was, a Vietnam War veteran and a soldier. And I did that for a very, very long time. But what I learned is that it comes out in other ways. Your emotions and feelings that you bury come out in other ways. For me, it came out in people pleasing and lack of boundaries, in destructive relationships, in destructive relationship with alcohol, in a work addiction. It was anything that I could do to not feel the pain that I had within me, because it was just so painful to even address that my father was no longer here. So I couldn't even visit his gravesite, just to give you an example, for years and years and years. So I went on wearing this mask of strength for a very long time, for about 20 years, until another health crisis, actually it was probably about 22 years to be exact, another health crisis hit me over the head. And that was an undiagnosed mystery illness that took me to my knees. I was so incredibly sick. It first started off with flu-like symptoms. I couldn't digest anything. I started losing my vision. I started having chronic migraines. My body was going numb. My arms went numb. My legs went numb. I've lost control of my bowels. I mean, I've seen so many doctors diagnosed with everything under the sun: fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, stress and anxiety because you're a young mom. And so it wasn't until I had delivered my third child, Scarlett, did those symptoms like just come rip roaring back in. And then I was in the hospital and taken by ambulance. I was so sick. I truly, and I say this in my book, like, I was dying, and I felt like I was dying, and I was sure that my last days were near. And at the same time of this mystery illness, I was also diagnosed with severe postpartum depression. So I had these like two major illnesses lingering over me. And I'll never forget, like one day I'd like come back from the hospital because I lost my vision again. I couldn't see, I had vertigo, and I just like fell on my knees and surrendered. I was like, God, you can take me now because this is just way too painful for my family to experience and for me, or like, I'm just going to surrender, but I am no longer in control here. And what happened after that was, because I had no choice but to be still because I was so sick, I was so bedridden, did the trauma from my past start bubbling up. And that is the first time in 22 years that I gave myself permission to feel everything. I was grieving for my health. I was grieving for my dad. All the feelings came out. I screamed, I cried, I journaled. I mean, this was not like a one-day thing. This was like a many multi-year thing. And it turned out I finally got a correct health diagnosis that was Lyme disease. So Lyme disease and postpartum depression. And what I learned was that the physical healing was only really 20% of what needed to happen. The mental and emotional and spiritual healing were the other 80%. And I had to start with that first before the physical symptoms subsided. And that's exactly what I did. So there is where my healing journey started. Wow.
And I know that you said at the beginning of our conversation that, during the pandemic, what did you say? I'm trying to remember exactly how you said it. You can probably help me out here, but you said it will probably take us years to process the collective trauma that we've all experienced. So let me ask you this. Do you think that there are certain groups that are more vulnerable to experiencing the long-term trauma, or do you think it's just that we're all just out here trying to do what we do, and it's just affecting some people differently, or maybe they're not even acknowledging their trauma yet? What are your thoughts?
I think that's a great question. I think what I've learned about trauma is that it affects everyone differently. And, I had someone come up to me yesterday and say, oh, I read your book, but I never went through a trauma like what you went through. And I'm like, no, we're not comparing traumas here. Because I'll tell you what, the same thing that happened to my sister happened to me. And we both experienced it differently. We both processed it differently. For me, I didn't even process it at all. And so like, I think what comes down to it is that, yes, we are all going through a collective trauma. It is going to hit every single person differently based on their socioeconomic status, based on whether or not they're a parent, an empty nester, a single person. Like I have two single female cousins who said this is the loneliest they have ever been in their entire lives, which is the complete opposite of my situation with three young children at home and me running a business. I have not been alone in over 2 years. Which is the truth. So it's a collective trauma that we all are experiencing differently, but what needs to happen is similar for all people, in that we all need to give ourselves permission to feel what we are feeling in our heart. And those feelings might be different than my lonely cousins who are single and, those empty nesters, or the people who are struggling to get food on the plates to their families. The circumstances are different, but what needs to happen is the permission to feel these. That's where the healing happens. And my worry is that we're going to go through this collective trauma, and a majority of people are going to try to get back to act like life is normal and forget that, oh, I just went through a trauma for 2 entire years. And you wouldn't be surprised if a health crisis shows up in them later in life because they've buried all the trauma from these past 2 years within them. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I was thinking that, and I'm an empty nester, and I work from home, and, I feel like for me, it's gone in peaks and valleys, mountains and valleys. And, sometimes when I was on the downside of it, when I was feeling like the pressures and the isolation and a lot of the other things, I could get glimpses of what it looked like and what I could remember from being up at the mountaintop. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's affecting all of us so differently based on circumstances. And I have often thought of the people who live alone and how difficult that must be, not to have somebody day in and day out to just connect with, because you talk about that too. You said Let me see if I can find it. You said the power of connection and community for healing is so important. And that is my heart as well.
Yeah, it's so important, Terry. I used to think I could go through this healing journey on my own. And look, I definitely recognize that this was an inside job that first started with me. So I'll say first, connect with yourself. And that's really your authentic power. That's the wisdom that you have within you already. What I've learned is that we are all the experts of our own lives. We already have the answers within us. And it's when we get quiet and still and listen to that wisdom within, and then take it a step further and trust that wisdom. That's the best way to connect to ourselves, is accessing our authentic power. And then once we do, so I did that first, and then I felt called to connect with others. And I was so scared at first to get vulnerable about what I was experiencing. The only people who knew about my health crisis were my immediate family, because I felt like running a company, mask of strength, had to wear that. My friends had to look like everything was perfect, right? Like I felt like I needed to be that perfect people pleaser, happy person. And what I learned was that when I got vulnerable and real, my friendships deepened. And it's like they changed in such a beautiful way. I will never forget opening up to a group of my girlfriends from high school about what was happening. And I was met with so much love and compassion, and people were bringing me like things that I would just not expect. And in the same way, I reached out to my church community, and I let them know what was going on. And I was met with so much love, and people were there for me. And I'll also say this about connection too. I also, during my journey, I joined a Lyme disease support group, and I felt like it wasn't a right fit for me. And so it's also okay to have connections that don't serve you, and you don't have to stay there. Right. And so I've learned a lot about connecting, but what I have learned is that when you get open and vulnerable about how you're really feeling with others, you will be met with so much love and compassion. And if you're not, you shouldn't connect with them anyway. And so I talk a lot about that in my book, Authentic Power.
It's interesting. I developed a better relationship with vulnerability in my midlife. And one of the things that I learned was, you think you're putting up these walls to protect yourself from feeling hurt or whatever, almost like you're ashamed that if anybody ever sees the real you, that they wouldn't even like you wouldn't be. Yeah. And what I've learned is, those walls, they keep people out as well. Mm-hmm. You might think they're protecting you, and maybe on some level they do, but they also keep you from having the deep, close connections that you really want. Because if you're not being authentic, I'll use your word, and being vulnerable, nobody can really know you. And how can anybody really connect with you, empathize with you, be in close relationship with you if they don't know you? I mean,
and that, I love that. And it also, to go even deeper with it, it's you need to know you. And that's why I say, connect with yourself first. I had to do that. I was like, who am I? Who is Ashley? I have been putting on this Oscar-worthy act for years. I don't even know who I am anymore. What do I like? Right. And who do I want to be with? Who am I? And so when you connect with yourself first, then you're able to connect with others, because you're showing up as your truest you as self.
Right. I love that. I agree with that 100%. You talk about turning your sensitivity into your superpower. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So I'm so curious if your listeners can relate to this, but my entire life, I've been told that I'm just too sensitive. And mostly by doctors. I feel like, I would have a sore throat or some health ailment. And I'll never forget a doctor looking at me and being like, oh, you're just more sensitive than the average bear. And then even at work, I've had people say, oh, she's just too sensitive. Oh, you're so sensitive. So I always thought my sensitivity was at a detriment. It was something that I should hide, because I am a very sensitive person. I'm an empath. I feel like I can pick up others' feelings and emotions. And I've done a lot of research as to why that might be. A lot of it has to do with your childhood, but regardless, I'm just a sensitive being. And when I was going through my health crisis, I had this aha moment where I was like, wait a second, why can't I use my sensitivity as a gift? Like I'm very, very good at reading people. This is actually what makes me a good business owner. And I'm very sensitive to the needs of my children. How is that at a detriment? And so once I really started owning that I'm a sensitive person, I like truly owning it. Like even yesterday I was texting a friend and I was like, oh, that's just the empath sensitive in me. I can't help it. Cause I was like worried about him and his dad and like a health diagnosis. And I was like up in the middle of the night worrying about it. And he's like, don't worry about it. I'm like, that's just me. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry, but like, this is who I am. And this is a gift. And once you start to see your gifts as your superpowers, and for me, it's sensitivity, so much can change and like in my life. And I'm like, I own that power. And I see that as something that I can use even in my life designer coaching as a life coach now. And because of my ability to read people and truly listen and actually feel what they're feeling. In the same way that I'm a parent too. So that's what I mean by my sensitivity is my superpower. So I would say for your audience, like, what are some of your qualities or superpowers that you've been told shouldn't be your quality or superpower? Right. I would invite you to get curious about why not, and maybe revisit it, because once I revisited the theme of sensitivity in my life, so much changed. And now I use that as a huge asset as to who Ashley is. It defines me and I love me for that.
Oh, I love that so much. Yeah, I'll have to think about some of the things that, so I guess I'll ask you this question. Are you familiar with the Enneagram at all?
Yeah, I am. I am. I think I'm a 7.
A 7. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So how long have you owned your business?
I've had my business since 2015. So this is actually like this week is its 7th year.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
So I guess the question about the Enneagram is and I've just been fascinated with it for a while now, but when you really start to understand what drives you and where you are in your best moments and where you need to improve, it's kind of like what you're saying with your superpowers. When you're aware of some of those things that could potentially hold you back, why not learn to use them in a way that's helpful and useful?
Yes,
like
exactly it.
I'm a 9. And one of the things about 9s is we don't like conflict, but guess what? It makes us great mediators. So
brilliant.
When I have, and this has happened recently, when I have 2 people in my life that, I love, and I can see both sides of their story, it helps me be able to go in and go, but maybe you should look at it this way. And what if you just approached it, a little differently and did this or said this? And so I am totally on board with what you're saying about turning it into your superpower. You can take something that is meant to be a weakness according to the world and society, and you can turn around and use it for good, right? Instead of evil.
It's so true. I mean, get curious about it. Like, I love what you just said, like what society sees as a weakness. And remember, this is society and culture. That's not you. Right. Like what society and culture says does not define you. And it really is, once I started to turn that conditioning off and get curious about what my heart was feeling, it changed everything for me. So like, that's what I would say. Like, think about what society sees as some of your weaknesses and get curious about that and see if you can redefine it for yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as we wind up here today, I want to ask you a couple more questions. So obviously you've got this book. How long did it take you to write the book?
Let's see. Well, I will say this. A book takes a lot of time and it's a labor of love. And I think it could have taken me another 2 years, but I had a vision of like really getting it out as quickly as I could. So it took me about probably 2020, a year start to finish. And then all the publishing and the production had to happen. And so then it published in December, 2021. So I started it in March, 2020. So from start to pub date, about a year and a half.
So, you're not the first author that I've interviewed that says that they started out by journaling. So,
oh yeah.
Would you recommend that to any of my listeners who, have journaled a lot and they're thinking, gosh, I'd love to write a book?
Oh my gosh. I have so much to say about journaling. So yes, absolutely. If you look back at your journal, you know what I love doing? I love reading what I write in my journal. Sometimes I'll just sit in the mornings and just reread what I wrote, because you see how far you've come.
I was thinking exactly that. Like, I don't like to read them right away, but when I come across them and they're a couple years old, I will tell you this with tongue in cheek, just kind of laughing at myself, but I'll go, God, I'm kind of smart.
I know. I can totally relate to that. Or I'm like, ooh, I had a bad day that day.
Yeah,
okay. You know,
exactly.
like you really, but I love it. And yes, it was that journaling. And so this is actually something that I also talk about in my book. You can also take it a step further. And my spiritual mentor, Leanne Taylor, taught me about sacred writing, which is essentially journaling, but it's like journaling without editing yourself and asking yourself a question. So like, I actually did that today, and I have journals like all over my house. So today I was like, what does my heart need today? How does my heart feel today? And I just went and I like wrote, and you'll find that like what it is, I actually have it right here. It like really like I will surprise myself sometimes. And I'm like, did I really write that? Like,
yes.
I like, and so I would say, ask yourself powerful questions. And I have this in my book, Authentic Power. At the end of each chapter, I do have a journaling prompt. So like the first chapter is like, think back of things that you love to do as a child. Because I always say that like, before we were conditioned, before society and culture got a hold of us, there were parts of our essence that really are like our divine calling that we need to pull from. And that starts in our childhood. And for me, that was dancing and writing and poetry. And so now I'm like, I write all the time and I ask myself questions. And, you know, today it was, how is my heart doing today? Or that was the other day, but I'm always like, how is my heart doing today? So checking in with yourself, saying, how is my heart doing today? Or sometimes if you want to have a conversation with God, spirit, or the divine, you can say, Spirit, God, what will you have me know today? That's it. And just see what comes up and see what happens. And like today I was like, what can I do to unjam my brain? And like what I got back was, delegate, take one thing at a time, baby steps, and set a timer. Like I don't think I would have been able to come up with those had I not given the time to ask myself those powerful questions and hear what is coming back. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And we were talking a little bit before I started the recording, and I was sharing with you over the holidays, I had COVID, and so overwhelming, such an overwhelming experience to be trying to move and, you know, be sick at the same time and worrying about dates that are supposed to happen that aren't going to happen. And one day I just got still and I said to I heard this like voice, which I think is mine. And it said, focus on the things you can control.
Yes.
Just focus on the thing. And it became like my mantra and what kept me going through the whole it felt like the longest period of my life, but focus on the things you can control. So you do have to get still and listen to yourself sometimes. You know, there's so much wisdom. I was joking in my journal when I said I was so smart, but when you really allow yourself to open up and journal as though no one is ever going to read it, because I feel like a lot of women, maybe even people, I'll give the men some credit in this too. We sometimes want to journal. We're tempted to journal as though someone's going to critique it or judge us for our thoughts. And, you know, just let go and put your thoughts, your true authentic, there's that word again, down on the paper. And then when you do go back and review it, you will love yourself for the wisdom that you have.
It's so true. And I think it's so powerful and transformational too. Like I keep every single journal that I write, and I have for years since my healing journey. But like, I'll also say this, what works for me might not work for you. A lot of people like to take their journals and burn them, and hey, that's good too. And I think that's one more element that I want to add about like this journey that we're all on for healing. And, is that there's no one size fits all approach. Like journaling works for me. Right. Journaling could work for you. I highly recommend anybody give it a try, but maybe you don't keep your journals. And like for me, you know, I would say like meditating helped me. That doesn't mean it helped you, but would it help you? But try it, see what happens. Like I used my story of healing because these are healing modalities that worked for me. And my hope is that by just hearing about how I experimented with so many different healing modalities, someone could get curious about experimenting with so many other things in their life that they could try.
Absolutely. And one of the things I do as a coach with my clients is I encourage them to do what I call brain dumps. So, in women, and I use the word women a lot because that's who I work with.
Right.
But women, we have 1,000 thoughts going through our head. And sometimes you just need to brain dump. And if you don't like to write, if you're not someone who likes to write, and maybe you don't even want to type it, there's a little voice recorder app on all of our smartphones. Just dump it there.
Oh my gosh. That's how I wrote like half of my book. I would walk my local lake and record my voice and then dump it onto paper after that.
Yeah. I do it with podcast topics too. I'll be walking and I'll get this idea for a podcast in my head, and I'll just pull up that voice recorder app and I'll just get the ideas, and then they're there. They're saved on your phone. You can go back to them anytime you want to. So yeah, we are definitely on the same page on this, Ashley.
We are.
All right. So the last question, well, no, I got two more actually. Do you think you'll write another book?
I'm going to say yes, because now that I have published this book, I'm so happy and fulfilled. And I feel like I've gone back to that childhood Ashley of like what her calling and purpose is on this earth. And it's definitely to be doing more writing. I'm very interested in poetry. So like, we'll see if that might be my next adventure. But yes, there's definitely more books within me. I think everybody has a book in them.
I think you're right. That's so awesome. I've always wanted to write a book, but I've changed the type of book I wanted to write over the years because, I'm very much into self-development and personal development, but I also, had some trauma in my own childhood, and books were my escape. And so I've always kind of wanted to write a fiction book just because I want to give another woman or another person a place to escape to. So we'll see if that ever happens, but that's awesome. I've heard more than one author say that after you write the first one, you definitely want to write a second one. So
and Terry, you absolutely could do it. You could do it. Yeah, I see it for you.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. My last question, Ashley, what do you think women want today?
Oh, I love that question. I think women want today is love. Like, that's been after 2 years of the pandemic, I was just having a conversation with one of the doctors that I interviewed for my book, and she's an ER physician in Detroit. And she was talking about how frontline workers are just needing love. And I feel like we all need more love after these 2 years. And I certainly do. I feel it in my children. I feel it in my spouse. I feel it in my friends. And love can look like acts of kindness. It can be self-love. It can be making love, however you see it fit. But I think women, all of us, want and need and require more love. And there's we can never get enough. That's where my heart is today.
I absolutely love that answer. So as we end today, tell people where they can find you, and we'll make sure we put all that in the show notes, but give us an idea of how to connect with Ashley.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that. So my website is Ashley Bernardi, ASHLEY Bernardi, BERNARDI.com. You can find all the information about my book there. My company is Nardi Media for PR, NARDI Media. And then I also have a podcast called Two Girls Talking, which I host with my dear friend, Anna. She is actually my former boss at my old TV show, because in my past life, I was a TV producer, and everyone always jokes that you get Anna and Ashley together and they'll never stop talking. So that's why we're Two Girls Talking. So definitely check us out. We are on Podbean and just have some really fun conversations about motherhood and entrepreneurship and journalism on there.
Awesome. I can't wait to listen into that, Ashley. I didn't know that about you before today. So I definitely look forward to that. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with me today. I've enjoyed this conversation. As usual, the time just flies right by, but you've got so much more to talk about. I'll have to have you on again in the future.
I would love that, Terry. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you'd like to continue the conversation, come on over and join our private Facebook group, What Women Want Today. I'd love to hang out with you some more there. Any resources mentioned in today's episode will be in the show notes. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at What Women Want Today Podcast, or visit my website at whatwomenwanttoday.com. Please remember to subscribe, download, and share. Leave me a review. It helps other amazing women find the show and become a member of our community. One last thing for you today. You are not alone. You are worthy of love and a fulfilled life. Now it's time to go after it.